The historical origins of the Mexica, the people who would later form the heart of the Aztec Empire, are rooted in a complex tapestry of archaeological evidence and mythological narrative. The story begins not in the fertile heart of central Mexico, but in a distant, unconfirmed location known as Aztlan. Modern scholars debate the physical existence of this place, interpreting it either as a real location in the arid northwestern regions of Mexico or as a purely symbolic representation of a mythical homeland. It is here, from a cluster of 7 caves referred to as Chico Mostoc, that the various Nahua tribes, including the Mexicare, said to have emerged. This origin narrative served as a crucial foundation for their later identity. In this mythical homeland, the Mexica were a small, nomadic tribe, part of a larger group of peoples collectively known as the Chichimeca. This term, often translated as barbarians, was used by the more advanced, settled civilizations of the Valley of Mexico to describe the less sophisticated, mobile groups from the north. The Mexica of Aztlan were not yet the builders of magnificent cities, nor were they the formidable military force that would one day dominate the region. Their existence was defined by a more basic social and political structure, lacking the complex hierarchies and urban development of the civilizations they would eventually encounter. The narrative of their departure from Aztlan is preserved in historical texts and codices such as the Chronica Mexicayotl and the Codex Boturini. These sources do not describe a peaceful or prosperous exodus, but rather a profound historical break initiated by the command of their patron deity, Huitzilopochtli. This divine mandate transformed the Mexica from a settled community into a people defined by their pilgrimage, leaving behind their ancestral home for a future that existed only in prophecy. The journey was not a simple relocation. It was a fundamental shift that forged their identity as a people with a singular, divine purpose. The myth of Aztlan served a critical political function for the Mexica. By claiming a shared origin from the 7 caves, they positioned themselves within a lineage of established Nahua tribes, granting them a sense of legitimacy. More importantly, their divinely mandated departure and the subsequent 2-century-long migration justified their later martial culture and territorial expansion. Their destiny to build a glorious city was not born of ambition, but of divine command. The journey south was not just a migration, it was the crucible in which the character of an empire was forged, transforming a small, marginalized tribe into a people with an unshakable sense of destiny and a divine right to rule. The foundational event of Mexica history is the divine mandate received from their patron deity, Huitzilopochtli. This figure was not only the god of the sun, but, crucially, a god of war and a demanding authority within the Mexica pantheon. According to the narrative preserved in various historical codices, including the Codex Boturini, Huitzilopochtli commanded his people to leave their mythical homeland of Aztlan. This directive was not a matter of choice, but an irrevocable command that initiated a profound transformation of the Mexica identity. They were to abandon their lives as a small, marginalized group and undertake a centuries-long pilgrimage, guided by a single, powerful prophecy. The core of this prophecy was a specific, unyielding sign that would mark the location of their future capital. Huitzilopochtli declared that they were to establish their city where they found an eagle, a symbol of the sun and divine authority, perched upon a prickly pear cactus. In its talons, the eagle would be devouring a serpent, a symbol often associated with the earth and with rival older deities. This precise omen served a critical ideological function, providing the Mexica with a divine justification for their future expansion and dominance. It positioned their destined city not as a product of human ambition, but as a site chosen by a god, giving their eventual capital of Tenochtitlan a sacred and unassailable legitimacy. The journey initiated by this prophecy was a deliberate, ideological break with their past. The Mexica were to become a mobile, disciplined people, their social and political structures increasingly shaped by the demands of migration. This long period of pilgrimage is documented in sources like the Chronica Mexicayotl, which recount their wanderings and periods of subjugation to establish city-states in the Valley of Mexico. During this time, The prophecy was not merely a spiritual guide, it was a political instrument that kept the tribe unified and focused on a collective, long-term goal. The memory of the prophecy, passed down through generations, solidified their resolve and hardened their martial culture, as they had to constantly defend themselves and their sacred bundle of Huitzilopochtli against hostile neighbors. The fulfillment of this prophecy would eventually legitimize their claim to the inhospitable, swampy islands of Lake Texcoco. The narrative of the eagle on the cactus, seen as an affirmation of their destiny, transformed a difficult, unpromising location into the sacred heart of a new empire. This foundational myth, more than any military victory or political alliance, was the engine of the Aztec state. It gave them a sense of purpose and a divinely ordained mission to conquer, to build, and to ultimately become the dominant power in the region, a destiny that was born not in the Valley of Mexico, but in the powerful words of a god spoken in a mythical land. Following the divine command of Huitzilopochtli, the Mexica initiated their prolonged migration from the mythical homeland of Aztlan. This journey was not a rapid conquest, but a 2-century-long pilgrimage, a period of immense demographic and cultural transformation. Historical sources, particularly the pictorial accounts in the Codex Boccherini and the written histories from the colonial period, document their departure as a cohesive, though small tribe. The central focus of their existence during this time was the maintenance of their sacred bundle, the physical manifestation of their god, and the relentless pursuit of his prophecy. This sustained period of wandering through the Chichimeca territories to the north of the Valley of Mexico had a profound impact on the Mexica's social structure. It necessitated a highly mobile and adaptable military organization, forging them into a tribe known for its martial ferocity and discipline. Unlike the sedentary agricultural societies they would later encounter, the Mexica's survival depended on their ability to defend themselves and move efficiently, a lifestyle that honed their skills in warfare and created a society where military prowess was a central virtue. As the migration brought them into the densely populated Valley of Mexico, the Mexica's status shifted from independent nomads to a marginalized, landless tribe. The valley was a geopolitical mosaic of powerful city-states, or altepetl, such as Culhuacan, Azcapotzalco, and Xochimilco. Initially, the Mexica were not a dominant force, but rather a subservient one. Historical records describe them serving as mercenaries for these more established civilizations, providing military service in exchange for land and protection. This period of political and military subjugation was, however, a critical learning experience. It exposed them to the advanced systems of the valley, including complex agriculture, sophisticated urban planning, and intricate political hierarchies. The Mexica's time as subordinates was not a sign of weakness, but a period of strategic adaptation. They absorbed the military tactics, diplomatic protocols, and engineering knowledge of their overlords, all while maintaining their core identity and the unwavering focus on Huitzilopochtli's prophecy. Their martial culture, tempered by the long journey, made them highly sought after as warriors, even while they were seen as little more than landless barbarians. This 2-century pilgrimage, culminating in their arrival in the heart of central Mexico, was the crucible that transformed a minor nomadic group into a disciplined, militarized society with a singular purpose, prepared to navigate the complex world of the valley and, ultimately, to seize their prophesied destiny. The Mexica's arrival in the Valley of Mexico marked the end of their independent nomadic existence and the beginning of a prolonged period of political subjugation and strategic adaptation. The valley, a fertile basin rich with resources and a complex geopolitical landscape, was dominated by powerful city-states known as altepetl. These included Culhuacan, a descendant of the revered Toltec civilization, Azcapotzalco, the dominant Tepanec power, and Texcoco, a center of culture and learning. The Mexica, a small, landless, and militarily formidable tribe, were initially perceived as a valuable but volatile asset by these more established powers. Historical records, such as the Chronica Mexicayotl, detail the Mexica's initial interactions, which were characterized by a series of shifting alliances and periods of subservience. They were frequently employed as mercenaries, their fierce martial skills utilized by one city-state against another. This role as hired warriors provided them with invaluable exposure to the advanced military tactics and organizational structures of their employers. They learned to fight not just as a small, cohesive tribe, but as a component of larger, more disciplined armies, absorbing new military technologies and strategies. This period of military service was a critical, if humbling, apprenticeship in the art of war. Beyond military service, the Mexica's time as subordinates exposed them to the sophisticated social and political systems of the valley. They learned the intricacies of diplomacy and tribute, observing how the great empires maintained control over their subject populations. Their exposure to advanced agriculture, particularly the intensive cultivation methods and irrigation systems of the valley, provided a stark contrast to their nomadic past. The urban centers of the Altepetl offered a model for the city they were destined to build, teaching them about monumental architecture, specialized labor, and the logistics of sustaining a large population. The most significant period of subservience was their residency in the territory of Culhuacan. Though it ended in expulsion, this era proved instrumental for the Mexica. It was in Culhuacan that they adopted key cultural and religious practices, intermarrying with the local nobility, and thereby claiming a lineage connected to the prestigious Toltec heritage. This strategic integration into the existing power structure, despite their marginalized status, would be crucial for their eventual rise. The final act of their time in Culhuacan, which led to their expulsion, demonstrated their unwavering commitment to their patron god, Huitzilopochtli, and set them on a course to find their prophesied home. Thus, the Mexica's encounters with the great civilizations of the valley were a period of forced humility and strategic learning. They were a people without a home, yet they were an active participant in the valley's political and military struggles, all while assimilating the knowledge and skills necessary to one day become masters of those who had once been their lords. This era of subservience was not an end, but a prolonged preparation, a final crucible that forged the character of the empire to come. Following their expulsion from Culhuacan, the Mexica found themselves once again as a landless tribe in the Valley of Mexico, a status that would define their existence for several decades. This period, from approximately 1299 to 1325 CE, was a time of intense struggle for survival and political identity. Lacking a fixed territory and the agricultural base to support a large population, they were marginalized by the dominant Altepetl. Their martial reputation, while a source of fear and respect, was not enough to secure them a permanent place among the established elite. During this era, the Mexica's existence was characterized by a constant series of moves and temporary settlements. Historical sources, including the Codex Boturini, depict them moving through various locations in the valley, often on the periphery of more powerful polities. This constant wandering, while a practical necessity, reinforced their nomadic heritage and distinguished them from the sedentary, land-based societies around them. Their primary interactions with these dominant powers were either through military service or as a source of conflict. Their feared martial prowess meant they were often courted for alliances, but their lack of a fixed home made them unreliable partners in the eyes of their potential allies. The Mexica's social and political structures continued to be shaped by this rootless existence. The supreme authority, or Tlatoani, was not a territorial ruler, but a leader of a migrating people. The military remained the central pillar of their society, with warrior societies and a strong emphasis on discipline and combat efficiency. This period of being a people without a home was a critical test of their cultural cohesion. The unwavering commitment to Huitzilopochtli's prophecy served as the ideological anchor that prevented the tribe from dissolving under the immense pressure of political and economic instability. The most crucial moment of this period of wandering came with their final expulsion from the lands of Azcapotzalco, the dominant Tepanec Empire. This event, driven by Tepanec political interests, forced the Mexica into the most desolate and undesirable territory in the valley, a tiny, swampy island in the middle of Lake Texcoco. It was in this seemingly inhospitable location that they would finally fulfill their prophecy. Their marginalized status and lack of a home, which had been a source of weakness for decades, ultimately forced them into a position where they had no alternative but to build a city from nothing. This final act of desperation, guided by a divine vision, would transform their greatest vulnerability into their greatest strength, setting the stage for the founding of Tenochtitlan and the eventual rise of their empire. The decades of being a landless tribe were not an end, but a final, defining chapter of their pilgrimage. The culmination of the 2-century Mexica pilgrimage came in the year 1325 CE, with the fulfillment of the prophecy of Huitzilopochtli. This event, a cornerstone of Aztec historical and ideological identity, occurred in the most improbable of locations, a tiny, desolate island situated in the middle of Lake Texcoco. The land itself was inhospitable, a swampy, marsh-ridden patch of ground with no apparent resources and no strategic advantages. It was a territory that no other city-state in the Valley of Mexico had deemed worthy of settlement, effectively making it the last available land for the landless Mexica tribe. According to historical codices and post-conquest accounts, the Mexica priesthood and elders, at the end of their long and arduous journey, finally observed the sacred omen. On this small island, they found an eagle perched upon a prickly pear cactus with a snake in its talons. This imagery, rich with symbolism, was immediately interpreted as the unmistakable sign from their patron deity. The eagle, a powerful solar symbol, represented Huitzilopochtli and the celestial authority. The cactus, a tenacious plant that thrives in harsh conditions, signified the resilience of the Mexica people. The serpent, often associated with the earth and with rival deities, was now subdued, indicating the triumph of their god. The discovery of this omen transformed an undesirable geographical location into a sacred space. It gave the Mexica a divinely ordained claim to the island, legitimizing their settlement and providing a powerful ideological foundation for their future state. They were not merely squatting on unwanted land, they were fulfilling a sacred prophecy. This act of founding a city was therefore not just a pragmatic response to their landless status, but a religious and political act of immense significance. It provided them with a clear sense of purpose and a unified vision that had been their primary driver for over 200 years. The founding of Tenochtitlan on this small island required a radical departure from traditional settlement patterns. The Mexica had to learn to adapt to a lacustrine environment, developing innovative engineering and agricultural techniques to transform their swampy home into a viable city. Their initial challenges were immense, from creating stable ground for construction to defending their new settlement from established powers on the mainland. However, the prophecy of the eagle and the cactus served as a powerful motivator, an unshakable belief that their hardships were part of a larger, sacred plan. The founding of Tenochtitlan on this island, a place no one else wanted, was the final act of their pilgrimage and the inaugural moment of a new imperial destiny. A small, swampy island in Lake Texcoco, the Tenochtitlan was built on, presented the Mexica with immense engineering and logistical challenges. This location, which other city-states had deemed worthless, required them to move beyond traditional settlement methods and innovate extensively. The marshy ground, an unstable mixture of clay and mud, was incapable of supporting the weight of a stone city. This forced the Mexica to develop a foundational infrastructure to create a stable, habitable environment. The primary engineering solution was the creation of a vast system of wooden pilings. Historical accounts and archaeological evidence show that the Mexica drove thousands of these pilings deep into the lake bed, creating a firm subsurface upon which to construct buildings. This process, a labor-intensive and technologically demanding project, transformed the soft, unstable ground into a solid foundation. These pilings were then capped with a mixture of volcanic rock and gravel to create a stable, level surface for the construction of their temples, palaces, and residential structures. The entire city was, in essence, built on a man-made foundation that defied the natural limitations of their environment. In addition to creating stable ground, the Mexica had to manage the constant threat of flooding and the logistical challenges of living on an island. They constructed a sophisticated network of dikes and causeways to control the water levels of the lake and connect their island city to the mainland. The dikes, particularly the massive Nezahualcoyotl dike, were crucial for separating the freshwater areas from the brackish waters of the lake, protecting their city and their agricultural lands. The causeways were engineered to be both roads and bridges, equipped with gaps that could be opened to allow for the movement of canoes and closed in times of attack, providing a critical defensive advantage. The Mexica's greatest agricultural innovation to overcome the limitations of their lacustrine environment was the chinampa system. These floating gardens, created from woven reeds and anchored to the lake bed, were platforms of rich mud and vegetation. They were highly productive, allowing for year-round cultivation and multiple harvests. This system effectively turned the lake itself into a fertile agricultural engine, providing a consistent food supply for a rapidly growing population. The chinampas were a testament to the Mexica's ingenuity, transforming a desolation into a source of sustenance that other societies could not replicate. The construction of Tenochtitlan was not a product of leisurely development, but a period of intense, focused labor. It was a city born of necessity, where every building, every causeway, and every agricultural plot was a testament to the Mexica's determination to overcome the seemingly impossible. This process of building, more than any single military victory, solidified their identity as a people capable of great feats of engineering and organization, creating a city that was a reflection of their own resilience. Following the founding of Tenochtitlan in 1325 CE, the nascent city faced the immediate challenge of establishing a stable political leadership and a defensible position within the complex power dynamics of the Valley of Mexico. The Mexica, having been a landless and politically marginalized tribe, sought to legitimize their new settlement by establishing a formal royal lineage. This was a critical political act that transitioned their leadership from a temporary, pilgrimage-based authority to a more permanent, dynastic rule. The first Mexica Tlatoani, or supreme ruler, was Acamapicli, who began his reign around 1375 CE. His selection was a strategic decision. He was a son of a Culhuacan noblewoman and a Mexica father, a lineage that symbolically connected Tenochtitlan to the prestigious Toltec heritage of Culhuacan. This genealogical link was an important diplomatic maneuver, providing the Mexica with a veneer of legitimacy among the established Nahua city-states. Acamapitlí's reign, which lasted until 1395 CE, was focused on internal organization and the consolidation of power. He oversaw the initial division of Tenochtitlan into 4 administrative quadrants, a structure that would remain a cornerstone of the city's governance. Under Acamapitli and his successor, Huitzilihuitl, 1395–1417 CE, the Mexica's political reality was defined by their subservience to the Tepanec Empire of Azcapotzalco, led by the powerful ruler Tezozomoc. The Mexica were not an independent power, they were a tributary state. Their rulers were required to pay heavy tribute in the form of goods and military service. This relationship was both an economic burden and a military obligation, as Mexica warriors were frequently called upon to fight in Azcapotzalco's wars of conquest against other city-states in the valley. The reign of the third Tlatoani, Chimalpopoca, 1427–1427 CE, marked a period of increasing Tepanec pressure. Tezozomoc's policies became more oppressive, and the Mexica grew restless under his dominance. Chimalpopoca maintained diplomatic relations with Azcapotzalco, and during his reign, the first significant engineering projects of the city were undertaken, including the construction of a major aqueduct. However, Tepanec power was nearing its zenith, and the death of Tezozomoc in 1426 CE triggered a succession crisis that would fundamentally alter the balance of power. The assassination of Chimalpopoca, orchestrated by the new Tepanec ruler Maxtla, was a definitive act that severed the last ties of loyalty between the Mexica and their Tepanec overlords. This event, born from the treacherous politics of the valley, provided the Mexica with the catalyst to pursue true independence and begin their transition from a tributary city-state to a dominant imperial power. The initial decades of Tenochtitlan's existence were defined by its subordinate position within the Tepanec Empire, centered on the powerful city of Azcapotzalco. From approximately 1375 CE until the 1420s, the Mexica were not a sovereign power but a tributary state, a critical phase that profoundly shaped their political and military development. Their relationship with Azcapotzalco was dictated by the will of the formidable Tepanec ruler, Tezozomoc, who had established a vast and oppressive empire across the Valley of Mexico. As a tributary state, Tenochtitlan was subject to a stringent system of tribute. This was not a voluntary contribution, but a compulsory extraction of wealth and resources. The Mexica were required to provide a wide array of goods, ranging from agricultural products like maize and cotton to manufactured items such as reed mats and featherwork. This economic burden was a constant pressure on the nascent city's resources, forcing its leaders to organize labor and production to meet the demands of their Tepanec overlords. The tribute system, while oppressive, taught the Mexica invaluable lessons in resource management and logistical organization that they would later apply to their own empire. Beyond the economic demands, the Mexica were also militarily bound to Azcapotzalco. Their warriors were frequently conscripted to serve in Tezozomoc's wars of conquest, fighting as shock troops against other city-states. This military obligation, while a source of danger and loss, was also a crucible for their development. It provided Mexica warriors with extensive combat experience in a wide variety of campaigns and exposed them to the military tactics and siege warfare of their enemies and allies alike. Their fierce reputation grew during this period, but it was always in the service of another power. This strategic apprenticeship solidified their military prowess, giving them a level of experience far beyond what a small, independent city-state could have accumulated on its own. The Mexica's subjugation to Azcapotzalco had a significant impact on their political evolution. Their early Tlatoani, from Acamapichtli to Quimalpopoca, were required to navigate a treacherous political landscape, balancing loyalty to Tezozomoc with the growing resentment of their own people. The assassination of Chimalpopoca by Tezozomoc's successor, Maxtla, in 1427 CE was a definitive act that severed the last political bonds. It demonstrated the ultimate fragility of their subservient status and provided the catalyst for open rebellion. This period under the shadow of Azcapotzalco was thus not an era of stagnation, but a necessary and formative phase during which the Mexica acquired the economic, military, and political expertise that would allow them to transform from tributaries into imperial masters. The rapid growth of Tenochtitlan, from a small settlement to a burgeoning city, necessitated the development of a highly efficient and productive agricultural system. The limited marshy land of the island was insufficient to support a growing population, forcing the Mexica to develop an innovative solution to their agricultural challenges. This solution, known as the Chinampa system, was a testament to their engineering ingenuity and became a cornerstone of their economic and logistical success. A Chinampa was a rectangular plot of arable land constructed on the shallow lake bed. The construction process was both labor-intensive and technologically advanced. Plots were created by driving wooden stakes or woven reeds into the lake floor to form a rectangular enclosure. The interior was then layered with a rich mixture of lake mud, decomposed vegetation, and other organic matter, creating a highly fertile and well-irrigated plot. These artificial plots were anchored to the lake bed and were often separated by narrow canals that allowed for easy access by canoe. The Chinampa system offered several distinct advantages over traditional land-based agriculture. First, their location on the lake bed provided a constant and natural source of irrigation, eliminating the need for complex and resource-intensive systems of canals and aqueducts. The water level of the lake itself acted as a natural irrigation system, feeding the plants directly from the water table. Second, the constant replenishment of fertile lake mud meant that the Chinampas rarely required fallow periods, allowing for near-continuous cultivation. This high fertility, combined with the mild climate of the valley, enabled the Mexica to achieve multiple harvests per year, yielding significantly more crops than an equivalent area of mainland soil. The primary crops grown on the Chinampas included maize, beans, squash, chili peppers, and flowers. This concentrated, high-yield production was essential for feeding Tenochtitlan's rapidly expanding population and for generating surplus tribute for their Tepanec overlords. The canals that separated the Chinampas also served a secondary function as transportation routes, allowing farmers to easily transport their harvest to the city's markets via canoe, further enhancing the system's efficiency. The development of the Chinampa system was not just an agricultural innovation, it was a defining political and social achievement. It allowed the Mexica to overcome the limitations of their inhospitable homeland, turning a perceived weakness into an unprecedented strength. The vast network of Chinampas around Tenochtitlan provided the economic foundation that would enable the city to grow from a marginal settlement into the powerful capital of an empire. This system was the logistical heart of the Mexica state, a monumental feat of engineering that sustained their military and political ambitions for over a century. The Tepanec Empire of Azcapotzalco, under the leadership of Tezozomoc and later his successor, Maxtla, dominated the Valley of Mexico and held the Mexica of Tenochtitlan in a state of tributary subjugation. While this relationship was initially a source of military training and political experience for the Mexica, it became a growing source of discontent as Tepanec arrogance and oppression intensified. This period, from the late 14th century to the 1420s, was a critical turning point where Mexica leaders began to transition from a policy of subservience to one of clandestine preparation for rebellion. The primary catalyst for this shift was the oppressive tribute system. While the Mexica had learned to manage their economy to meet Tepanec demands, the constant extraction of resources created a significant economic strain on Tenochtitlan. The tribute included not only agricultural products and crafted goods, but also warriors for Azcapotzalco's frequent campaigns. This military obligation, which had once been a source of prestige, became a burden as the Mexica grew in strength and saw their resources being used to expand the power of their overlords. The assassination of the Mexica Tlatoani, Chimalpopoca, in 1427 CE was the final and most definitive act of Tepanec aggression. Maxtla, the new Tepanec ruler, orchestrated this event, which severed any remaining political bonds of loyalty and provided the Mexica with a clear casus belli for rebellion. Following Chimalpopoca's death, the Mexica elected Itzcoatl as their fourth Tlatoani. His leadership was a crucial element in the shift toward open rebellion. Itzcoatl was not only a skilled warrior, but a visionary statesman who understood that military action alone was insufficient. Under his direction and that of his influential advisor, Tlacaelel, the Mexica began a systematic and secret program of military and political preparation. This involved stockpiling weapons, training new generations of warriors, and, most importantly, engaging in covert diplomatic negotiations with other city-states that also resented Tepanec dominance. The Mexica's preparations for war were not a spontaneous act of defiance, but a carefully calculated strategy. They recognized that they could not defeat the formidable Tepanec Empire alone. Their clandestine diplomacy targeted Texcoco, a powerful city-state that had also suffered under Tepanec rule and had its own grievances against Maxtla. This political maneuvering was a testament to the Mexica's growing sophistication, moving beyond mere military strength to forge alliances that would be essential for their survival. The discontent sowed by years of Tepanec oppression, combined with a visionary new leadership, transformed the Mexica from a subjugated people into a determined and organized force preparing to challenge the dominant power in the valley. This period of secret preparation was the prelude to the War of Independence that would ultimately transform Tenochtitlan from a tributary state into the core of a new empire. The period following the assassination of Tlatoani Chimalpopoca in 1427 CE marked a profound shift in Mexica leadership and policy. The death of the ruler, orchestrated by the Tepanec ruler Maxtla, shattered any remaining illusions of a peaceful coexistence under Azcapotzalco's authority. In response, the Mexica elected Itzcoatl as their fourth Tlatoani. Itzcoatl was not a direct successor in the conventional sense, but a strategic choice by the Mexica nobility. As the son of the first Tlatoani, Acamapictli, and a commoner mother, he possessed a lineage that provided both legitimacy and a connection to the common people. His reign, from 1427 to 1440 CE, was a transformative era during which the Mexica were galvanized for a war of independence. Itzcoatl's leadership was distinguished by a shrewd and pragmatic approach to military and political strategy. He recognized that the Mexica, as a tributary state, could not defeat the powerful Tepanec Empire alone. His first and most critical move was to formalize the clandestine diplomatic efforts initiated under his predecessor, actively seeking a military alliance with other city-states that also resented Tepanec dominance. This diplomatic initiative culminated in the formation of the Triple Alliance, a coalition that would become the foundation of the Aztec Empire. Central to Itzcoatl's strategic vision was his influential advisor and nephew, Tlacaelel. Together, they forged a new military ideology for the Mexica. This ideology moved beyond the traditional role of mercenaries and tributaries and established a purpose of sacred, divinely mandated warfare. This concept, intertwined with the prophecy of Huitzilopochtli, reframed their struggle for independence as a cosmic battle against a tyrannical regime. It provided a powerful ideological justification for war and unified the Mexica people under a singular, aggressive purpose. The reign of Itzcoatl was dedicated to a systematic preparation for war. While Azcapotzalco was distracted by a succession dispute, he oversaw the stockpiling of weapons, the construction of defensive fortifications, and the rigorous training of new generations of warriors. His leadership transformed Tenochtitlan from a subservient city into a cohesive and militarily formidable force. The years under Itzcoatl were not just a period of military build-up, but a fundamental reordering of Mexica's society to support a total war effort. He successfully galvanized his people, unifying them under a shared vision of independence and imperial destiny, a feat that laid the groundwork for their rapid rise to power. His reign, though a brief prelude to the great age of expansion, was the definitive moment when the Mexica decided to challenge their destiny rather than accept it. The assassination of Chimalpopoca by the Tepanec ruler Maxtla in 1427 CE was a definitive act that provided the catalyst for the Mexica to seek a war of independence. However, the Mexica understood that they, as a single city-state, were militarily inferior to the formidable Tepanec Empire of Azcapotzalco. This strategic reality necessitated a complex diplomatic initiative to forge a coalition of forces with other polities that also harbored resentment against Maxtla's oppressive rule. The architect of this coalition was the new Mexica Tlatoani, Itzcoatl, with crucial support from his advisor Tlacaelel. Their primary diplomatic target was the city-state of Texcoco. Texcoco had a long and prestigious history, and its ruler, Nezahualcoyotl, had a personal grievance against Maxtla, who had overthrown his father and forced him into exile. This shared animosity provided a powerful foundation for an alliance. Nezahualcoyotl, a brilliant strategist and engineer, brought to the alliance not only his military forces, but also his considerable political and intellectual acumen. The formal agreement between Tenochtitlan and Texcoco established a pact to overthrow the Tepanec Empire and divide its spoils. A third, lesser-known but crucial partner in this coalition was the city-state of Tlacopan. Situated on the western shore of Lake Texcoco, Tlacopan was a Tepanec city but had also been alienated by Maxtla's tyrannical rule. By securing an alliance with Tlacopan, Itzcoatl and Nezahualcoyotl were able to secure a bridgehead on the western mainland, providing them with a critical tactical advantage. This three-way pact, known as the Triple Alliance, Excan Tlatoloyan in Nahuatl, was a masterstroke of diplomacy that transformed a localized conflict into a regional war. The military campaign against the Tepanecs, which began around 1428 CE, was a coalition effort. Mexica forces, under the command of Itzcoatl, fought alongside the armies of Texcoco and Tlacopan. Their combined military strength and a shared hatred of Maxtla proved to be an overwhelming force. After a series of decisive battles, they successfully besieged and conquered Azcapotzalco, effectively dismantling the Tepanec Empire. The war ended with Maxtla's death, securing the independence of the Triple Alliance members. The aftermath of the Tepanec War was as significant as the victory itself. The Triple Alliance established a new political order in the Valley of Mexico. The spoils and tribute of the conquered Tepanec lands were divided among the three city-states, with Tenochtitlan and Texcoco receiving the largest shares and Tlacopan receiving a smaller portion. This division of power, while unequal, created a stable framework that would allow the Triple Alliance to become the dominant imperial force in Mesoamerica. The formation of this alliance was not merely a military victory, it was the birth of the Aztec Empire. Following the decisive victory over the Tepanec Empire, the Mexica leadership embarked on a deliberate and systematic process of ideological reconstruction. This was a crucial phase in their transition from a landless tribe to the central power of a new empire. Under the guidance of Tlacaelel, a visionary statesman and high-ranking advisor, the Mexica undertook a project to rewrite their history, redefine their mission, and cast themselves as the divinely chosen people of the sun god, Huitzilopochtli. This ideological shift provided the new empire with a powerful, unifying narrative that justified its military expansion and political dominance. Tlacaelel's first and most significant act was the destruction of historical codices that documented the Mexica's past. These documents, which likely portrayed the tribe's humble origins, periods of subjugation, and alliance with the Tepanecs, were seen as an ideological liability. By burning these records, Tlacael created a tabula rasa, a clean slate upon which a new, more glorious history could be inscribed. The new historical narrative emphasized the Mexica's divine origin and their 2-century pilgrimage as a sacred quest, guided by Huitzilopochtli to find their prophesied homeland. It minimized their time as mercenaries and tributaries, recasting them as a people of destiny who were always meant to rule. This new ideology was intrinsically linked to the concept of sacred warfare. The Mexica's military campaigns were no longer framed as mere conflicts for territory and tribute. Instead, they were portrayed as a religious obligation to feed the sun god, Huitzilopochtli, with the blood and hearts of captured warriors. This theological justification for conquest, known as the Flowery War, provided a powerful incentive for military expansion and solidified the position of the warrior class within Mexica society. It also gave the Triple Alliance a compelling religious mission that bound its members together and provided a shared purpose. The ideological project extended to the Mexica's relationship with other deities. While they continued to acknowledge the vast pantheon of Mesoamerican gods, Huitzilopochtli was elevated to a supreme position, a status that reflected Tenochtitlan's newfound political power. The construction of the Templo Mayor, with its dual shrines dedicated to Huitzilopochtli and the rain god Tlaloc, physically manifested this new cosmic order. It established Tenochtitlan as the spiritual center of the universe, the place from which the sun drew its strength and where the gods were appeased. This ideological restructuring, a political masterstroke by Tlacaelel and the Mexica leadership, transformed a military victory into a divine mandate, setting the stage for a period of unprecedented imperial expansion and a new world order in Mesoamerica. Following their victory over the Tepanec Empire and the ideological restructuring of their state, the newly formed Triple Alliance embarked on a systematic and aggressive campaign of conquest. This period, beginning in the 1430s, saw the alliance expand its influence beyond the confines of the Valley of Mexico, establishing a vast network of tributary states that would form the economic and military foundation of the Aztec Empire. This was not a period of spontaneous raids, but a coordinated imperial project driven by a shared military purpose and a redefined historical destiny. The military campaigns were strategically executed to achieve specific objectives, securing a consistent flow of tribute, controlling key trade routes, and capturing warriors for ritual sacrifice. The first waves of conquest targeted the territories of former Tepanec tributaries, compelling them to shift their allegiance and tribute from the defeated empire to the new dominant power. The alliance's military organization was highly effective, combining the disciplined Mexica forces with the strategic acumen of Texcoco and the support of Tlacopan. Their campaigns were methodical, often involving an initial diplomatic demand for tribute and a declaration of war if it was refused. A key figure in these early campaigns was the Mexica Tlatoani Itzcoatl, who, with his advisor Tlacael, oversaw the initial expansion. The conquests began by solidifying control over the immediate vicinities of the Valley of Mexico, subduing city-states like Xochimilco and Cuitlahuac. These victories secured valuable agricultural lands and labor, which were essential for sustaining the rapidly growing population of Tenochtitlan. The tributary system was meticulously organized, with conquered territories being assessed for their resources and required to provide a specific quota of goods, which could include food, textiles, raw materials, or even captives for sacrifice. The Triple Alliance's military campaigns extended beyond the valley, pushing its borders into regions such as Morelos and Puebla. These campaigns were crucial for controlling the flow of goods and establishing long-distance trade routes. The conquests were not always absolute. The alliance often allowed local rulers to remain in power as long as they continued to pay tribute and provided military support when required. This system of indirect rule was a pragmatic approach to imperial administration, allowing the alliance to control vast territories without a permanent military presence in every subjugated city-state. The first waves of conquest were the practical application of the new imperial ideology. Warfare was not just for economic gain, it was a religious mission. The capture of warriors for sacrifice was a core tenet of their sacred warfare, giving their campaigns a profound religious significance that motivated their armies and legitimized their dominance. This era of military expansion transformed the Triple Alliance from a regional power into the formidable Aztec Empire, an entity that would come to dominate Mesoamerica for nearly a century. The reign of Moctezuma I, which began in 1440 CE, marked a new and critical phase in the history of the Triple Alliance. Following the foundational conquests of Itzcoatl, Moctezuma I, often referred to as Moctezuma the Elder, presided over a period of unprecedented territorial expansion that transformed the alliance into a formidable and geographically extensive empire. This era was characterized by a systematic push of the empire's borders south and east, driven by a strategic imperative to secure tribute, control key resources, and consolidate imperial power. Moctezuma I, a nephew of Itzcoatl, inherited a militarily formidable and ideologically unified state. His campaigns were not random acts of aggression, but were meticulously planned to achieve specific economic and political objectives. A key focus was the expansion of the empire's influence into the coastal regions of the Gulf of Mexico. This was a crucial strategic move, as it secured access to valuable resources such as cotton, cacao, feathers, and precious stones, which were either unavailable or scarce in the Valley of Mexico. The tribute from these new regions was a significant driver of the capital's economic prosperity and the enrichment of the nobility. The expansionist policy under Moctezuma I also sought to control and protect the major long-distance trade routes. The professional merchant class, the Pochteca, played a vital role in these campaigns, often serving as spies and agents who provided intelligence on potential targets. The conquest of key trading centers and the establishment of military garrisons along these routes ensured the safety of goods and the collection of tolls, further solidifying the economic dominance of the Triple Alliance. The subjugation of city-states in regions like Oaxaca and Veracruz was a direct result of this strategy. One of the most significant military engagements during Moctezuma I's reign was a series of campaigns against the powerful Mixtec kingdom. These were not merely for tribute, but were a direct challenge to a competing regional power, ultimately resulting in the integration of the Mixtec city of Coixtlahuaca into the Aztec imperial network. This victory demonstrated the alliance's ability to project its military might over vast distances and defeat sophisticated, well-organized opponents. Moctezuma I's reign was also a period of internal consolidation and cultural development. He oversaw a massive building program in Tenochtitlan, including the expansion of the Templo Mayor and the construction of new temples and causeways. These projects, often funded by the wealth of tribute from conquered territories, physically manifested the empire's growing power and religious supremacy. This era of expansion under Moctezuma I was a critical transition, moving the Aztec state from a regional power to a true empire, a process that established the geopolitical boundaries and economic foundations that would define its zenith. The Aztec military, the primary instrument of the Triple Alliance's imperial expansion, was a sophisticated and highly organized force with a unique structure and ideological purpose. Unlike many of their contemporaries, the Aztec military machine was not a standing army in the modern sense, but a system of conscription and professional warrior societies that could be mobilized for large-scale campaigns. Its effectiveness was rooted in a combination of social hierarchy, rigorous training, and a profound religious ideology that shaped its tactics and objectives. The military was structured around the Calpulli, or ward system. All able-bodied men from the commoner class, Masahaltin, were required to undergo basic military training from an early age, learning the use of shields, obsidian-bladed clubs, makuahuatl, and spears. This mass conscription ensured a vast pool of available manpower for imperial campaigns. While these commoners formed the bulk of the army, the command structure was dominated by the noble class, Kapiltin, who received specialized training in military academies known as Karmakak. The elite of the Aztec military were the professional warrior societies, most notably the Jaguars, Ocelotl, and Eagles, Quartly. Membership in these societies was earned through a series of military achievements, specifically the capture of a set number of enemies in battle. These elite warriors wore distinctive uniforms and armor, marking their high status and serving as a crucial motivator for common soldiers. The warrior societies were a meritocratic system, a key mechanism for social mobility in a highly stratified society, where a commoner could rise to a position of prestige and influence through battlefield success. A defining characteristic of Aztec military strategy was its ideological emphasis on capturing enemies rather than killing them in combat. The primary purpose of warfare was not territorial annihilation, but the acquisition of captives for ritual sacrifice, a practice central to their imperial ideology of feeding the sun god, Huitzilopochtli. This objective profoundly influenced their tactics and weapon design. The makuahuatl, a formidable weapon capable of inflicting serious wounds, was often used for stunning opponents, and their strategic maneuvers frequently focused on surrounding and subduing enemy forces. While battles could be incredibly bloody, the ultimate goal was to take prisoners, a practice that distinguished them from other militarized states of the era. This military machine, driven by a religious mission and supported by a structured system of training and social advancement, was a powerful force for imperial expansion. Its effectiveness was not solely dependent on a large army, but on a complex interplay of social, political, and religious factors that made it a dominant power in Mesoamerica for over a century. The economic foundation of the Aztec Empire was a sophisticated and multifaceted system that relied heavily on a structured tribute network, a robust market system, and a specialized class of long-distance merchants. This economic model was the logistical engine that sustained the capital of Tenochtitlan and funded the imperial expansion of the Triple Alliance. It was a system characterized by both the direct extraction of wealth through conquest and a complex indirect flow of goods through trade. The tribute system was the most significant and visible component of the Aztec economy. Following a successful military campaign, a conquered altarpetal was integrated into the imperial network and assigned a specific tribute quota. This was a compulsory payment, not a voluntary contribution. The tribute was collected at regular intervals by imperial officials and was meticulously documented in codices like the Matricula de Tributos. The goods collected were diverse, ranging from staple foods like maize and beans to luxury items such as gold, jade, feathers, and cacao. This constant inflow of resources allowed the Aztec state to maintain its massive population, fund public works, and support its noble and priestly classes without a direct, centralized tax system. The brutal and often oppressive nature of this tribute system was a major source of resentment among conquered peoples, a factor that would later be exploited by the Spanish. The economic model was supplemented by an extensive and highly organized market system. The capital of Tenochtitlan boasted the massive market of Tlatelolco, which was not only a center of commerce but a symbol of imperial power. Here, goods from all corners of the empire were traded, with a complex system of professional judges and inspectors ensuring fair transactions. This market, and others like it in major urban centers, facilitated the exchange of goods and resources, integrating the diverse economies of the empire and providing a crucial economic outlet for both local producers and imperial merchants. Central to this economic network was the Pochteca, a hereditary class of professional, long-distance merchants. The Pochteca were more than just traders. They were an elite class with their own deities, laws, and internal hierarchies. They undertook dangerous journeys to the far corners of the empire and beyond, trading for exotic luxury goods. However, their most critical function was as agents of the state. The Pochteca served as spies, gathering intelligence on the political stability, military strength, and economic resources of potential tributary states. Their information was vital for the planning of imperial conquests. They were also diplomats, carrying out missions on behalf of the Tlatoani. This dual role as merchants and agents of the state made the Pochteca an indispensable tool for imperial expansion, demonstrating the sophisticated interplay between economic, military, and political power within the Aztec Empire. The reign of Axiacatl, which began in 1469 CE, marked a critical period in the consolidation of Aztec imperial power. As the successor to Moctezuma I, he inherited a vast and expanding empire, but his tenure was defined by two primary objectives: to continue the military expansion initiated by his predecessors and to solidify the internal dominance of Tenochtitlan within the Valley of Mexico. His reign, which lasted until 1481 CE, was a period of both significant military success and the suppression of internal dissent. Axiacatl's expansionist campaigns pushed the borders of the empire into new territories, notably to the west. A key strategic move was the conquest of the Matlatzinca and Otomi peoples in the Valley of Toluca. This campaign was crucial for securing the western flank of the empire and for gaining control of valuable resources from the region. The subjugation of these groups demonstrated the Triple Alliance's ability to project its military power over a wide geographical area and to integrate diverse populations into its tribute network. These conquests were not merely for territorial gain, but for the acquisition of tribute and the fulfillment of the Mexica's sacred duty to capture warriors for sacrifice. However, the most significant event of Axiacatl's reign was the conquest of the rival city of Tlatelolco. Tlatelolco, located on the same island as Tenochtitlan, was a powerful commercial center with its own independent Tlatoani and a massive market that rivaled that of the capital. Over the decades, a tense rivalry had developed between the two city-states, fueled by political competition and economic friction. In 1473 CE, this rivalry erupted into open conflict. Axiacatl led his forces in a direct assault on Tlatelolco, a brutal campaign that resulted in the death of its ruler, Moquihuix, and the complete annexation of the city. The conquest of Tlatelolco was a definitive act that had profound political consequences. It eliminated the last independent power on the island and consolidated Tenochtitlan's dominance over its immediate political and economic rivals. The once separate markets of Tenochtitlan and Tlatelolco were now under the sole control of the Mexica, reinforcing the capital's status as the commercial heart of the empire. This victory was not just a territorial expansion. It was an act of internal consolidation that cemented Tenochtitlan's position as the unquestioned leader of the Triple Alliance and the imperial capital. Axiacatl's reign, though it faced challenges, and did not achieve all of its military objectives against the Tarascan state, was a vital period in the empire's history. It solidified the Mexica's control over their immediate surroundings and demonstrated their willingness to use force to maintain internal order. The conquest of Tlatelolco, in particular, was a watershed moment that transformed Tenochtitlan from the most powerful city on an island into the sole and undisputed master of the capital. The reign of Tizoc, which began in 1481 CE, stands as a notable deviation from the successful military expansion that had defined the Aztec Empire under his predecessors. Succeeding Axayacatl, Tizoc inherited a vast and consolidated empire, yet his 7-year tenure was largely marked by military setbacks and internal instability. This period serves as a crucial case study in the dangers of imperial overreach and the political consequences of a ruler's perceived weakness. Tizoc's reign was characterized by a series of military campaigns that failed to achieve their primary objectives. His coronation war, a traditional campaign to secure captives and tribute for a new Tlatoani, was a notable disappointment. Historical sources indicate that the number of captives he secured was insufficient, and the overall success of the campaign was minimal. This initial failure cast a shadow over his entire reign, as a ruler's legitimacy was deeply intertwined with his military prowess. The Aztec imperial ideology, forged by Tlacaelel, demanded a powerful, victorious leader, and Tizoc's perceived lack of success directly challenged this core tenet. The political instability of Tizoc's reign was exacerbated by his diplomatic and administrative decisions. While he did oversee the expansion of the Templo Mayor, a significant cultural and religious project, his lack of military success meant he struggled to command the same level of authority as his predecessors. His policies faced opposition from the powerful warrior class, who saw a decline in their opportunities for glory and social advancement. This internal discontent was a direct result of Tizoc's inability to maintain a consistent flow of captives and tribute from successful conquests. The empire was not a static entity, and a failure to expand was often viewed as a sign of decay. The primary military campaigns of Tizoc's reign were met with stiff resistance. His attempts to quell rebellions and expand into new territories, particularly in the Oaxaca region, were either unsuccessful or achieved at a great cost. The most significant setback was the failed campaign against the Tarascans, the empire's most formidable rivals to the west. This defeat not only halted Aztec expansion in that direction, but also demonstrated the limits of their military machine when confronted with a well-organized and technologically advanced opponent. The reign of Tizoc ended in 1486 CE under mysterious circumstances. Historical accounts suggest his death was a result of illness, but chroniclers also allude to the possibility of poisoning, implying that he was assassinated by members of the nobility who were dissatisfied with his leadership. The brevity and perceived failure of his reign stand in stark contrast to the periods of monumental expansion that came before and after him. His rule serves as a cautionary tale within Aztec history, demonstrating that imperial legitimacy was not guaranteed by succession alone, but had to be continuously earned through military conquest and the successful administration of a vast and demanding tribute empire. The reign of Ahuitzotl, which began in 1486 CE, represents the military and territorial zenith of the Aztec Empire. Succeeding the brief and troubled tenure of Tizoc, Ahuitzotl's leadership was a definitive return to the aggressive expansionist policies that had defined the empire's rise. His 12-year reign was a period of unprecedented imperial growth, a massive building program in Tenochtitlan, and the consolidation of Aztec dominance across Mesoamerica. Ahuitzotl was a seasoned military commander and a decisive leader who immediately sought to reassert the empire's power. His coronation war, in stark contrast to that of his predecessor, was a massive success, securing thousands of captives and valuable tribute. This initial victory established his legitimacy and provided a clear signal to both internal nobility and external rivals that the era of imperial stagnation was over. His military campaigns were meticulously planned and executed, pushing the empire's borders farther than ever before. His most significant military achievements were focused on the southern and eastern frontiers. Ahuitzottl's armies successfully campaigned into Oaxaca and the Soconusco region, pushing the empire's influence all the way to modern-day Guatemala. These conquests were not merely for territorial expansion but were strategically vital for economic reasons. The Soconusco region, in particular, was a source of highly prized goods such as cacao, a form of currency, and fine feathers, which were essential for the tribute system and the display of imperial power. The subjugation of these distant territories demonstrated the logistical capabilities of the Aztec military to project power over immense distances and maintain control over a vast and diverse population. In addition to military expansion, Ahuitzottl's reign was marked by a monumental building program in the capital of Tenochtitlan. He oversaw the final and most magnificent expansion of the Templo Mayor, which was reconsecrated in 1487 CE in a ceremony of unprecedented scale. This massive project, which solidified the temple as the spiritual heart of the empire, was funded by the immense flow of tribute from his conquests. The building program also included the construction of a new aqueduct, the Aquecuexco aqueduct, which was critical for providing a fresh water source to the rapidly growing city. This infrastructure project was a testament to his administrative vision and his commitment to sustaining the capital's population. The reign of Ahuitzotl was the golden age of the Aztec Empire, an era of military and economic success that brought immense wealth and prestige to Tenochtitlan. The vast network of tributary states and the control of key trade routes under his rule created a stable and prosperous imperial framework. However, this period of imperial overreach also sowed the seeds of future conflict, as the brutal efficiency of his conquest and the demands of the tribute system created widespread resentment among the subjugated peoples. Ahuitzottl's reign, while a period of unprecedented success, would be the empire's last great age before the arrival of a new, unforeseen threat. The Templo Mayor, or Great Temple, stood at the heart of Tenochtitlan and was the symbolic and ritualistic center of the Aztec universe. Its construction and subsequent expansions were not merely architectural projects but fundamental acts of imperial ideology and religious necessity. This monumental structure was a physical manifestation of Aztec cosmology, representing the axis mundi sacred center, where the four cardinal directions converged and where the terrestrial plane connected with the underworld and the heavens. The temple was built in 7 distinct phases of expansion, each one a testament to the growing political and economic power of the Mexica state. As each Tlatoani came to power, they would ritually enclose the previous temple, building a new, larger structure over it, a practice that visually demonstrated the continuous growth and power of the empire. The dual nature of the Templo Mayor's design was central to its cosmological significance. The pyramid was topped by 2 separate shrines, one dedicated to Huitzilopochtli, the god of war and the sun, and the other to Tlaloc, the god of rain, agriculture, and fertility. This duality symbolized the core ideological principles of the Mexica, the complementary forces of war and agriculture. The Huitzilopochtli shrine, painted red to represent blood and fire, was associated with conquest, tribute, and the perpetuation of the sun's daily cycle. The Tlaloc shrine, painted blue and white to symbolize water and mountain rain clouds, was connected to the prosperity of the harvests and the sustenance of the people. The Templo Mayor was thus conceived as the sacred point of balance between these 2 essential forces, a place where the gods were appeased to ensure both imperial expansion and a stable food supply. The temple's primary function was as the main site for ritual sacrifice. This practice, often executed on a massive scale, was not an act of random violence but a highly ritualized and ideologically justified component of Mexica religion. The Aztecs believed that the gods had sacrificed themselves to create the universe, and that the sun, in particular, required a constant supply of human hearts and blood to continue its daily journey across the sky. The Templo Mayor, as the spiritual center, was the logical and most sacred location for these offerings. The vast number of captives from the empire's military campaigns were brought to the temple's summit, where priests would perform these ceremonies. This practice served a dual purpose. It fulfilled a theological imperative to maintain the cosmic order and, simultaneously, served as a powerful tool of imperial control, instilling fear in both rebellious tributaries and potential enemies. The Templo Mayor, in its physical grandeur and ritual function, was the ultimate expression of the Aztec worldview, a complex system of belief that bound together military conquest, economic prosperity, and the fate of the cosmos. The social structure of the Aztec Empire was a rigid and highly stratified system, a complex hierarchy that dictated every aspect of an individual's life, from their role in society to their opportunities for advancement. This system was not simply a product of imperial power, but was deeply intertwined with the Mexica's political, economic, and military institutions. Society was broadly divided into two main classes: the nobility, Pipiltin, and the commoners, Machihualtin, with serfs and slaves occupying the lowest rungs. At the apex of this hierarchy was the Tlatoani, the supreme ruler of Tenochtitlan, who was considered the living representative of the gods. The noble class, or Pipiltin, consisted of the extended royal family, high-ranking military officers, priests, and civil administrators. The status of the Pipiltin was hereditary, granting them ownership of land, exemption from manual labor and tribute, and exclusive access to the highest levels of education. They were educated in the Karmakak, a rigorous school system that prepared them for leadership roles in the military, priesthood, and bureaucracy. This elite class governed the empire, commanding its armies, administering its laws, and managing its vast tribute network. The commoner class, or Machihualtin, constituted the vast majority of the population. They were organized into wards, or calpuli, which were the basic administrative and social units of Tenochtitlan. Each calpuli had its own land, which was worked collectively by its members, and its own local leadership. The Machihualtin were the backbone of the Aztec economy, serving as farmers, artisans, and merchants. They were also the primary source of labor for public works and were subject to conscription into the military. While their status was generally fixed, the system was not entirely closed. A commoner could achieve a degree of social mobility through exceptional military achievement, rising to the ranks of the professional warrior societies, such as the Jaguars and Eagles, and thereby earning land and a privileged status. At the bottom of the social hierarchy were the serfs and slaves. Serfs, or meyaques, were a landless class tied to the land of the nobility. They worked the fields of the Pipiltin and were required to pay tribute and labor service. They were not considered part of the calpuli system. Slavery, or tlacatin, in Aztec society was distinct from its European counterpart. Individuals could be enslaved for a set period due to debt, punishment, or as a prisoner of war, but their children were born free, and they could regain their freedom through various means. This social stratification was a fundamental aspect of the Aztec imperial state, providing a structured framework for governance, military expansion, and economic production. Daily life in the Aztec capital of Tenochtitlan was characterized by a high degree of organization and sophistication, a testament to the Mexica's engineering and administrative capabilities. The city's urban plan was based on a grid system, divided into 4 main quadrants, with the ceremonial center at its heart. These quadrants were further subdivided into calpuli, or wards, which served as the basic social and administrative units. The city was crisscrossed by a network of canals that acted as the primary transportation arteries, with thousands of canoes navigating the waterways to transport goods, people, and resources. Wide, clean streets and causeways connected the island city to the mainland and were meticulously maintained by a dedicated class of public servants. The economic and social rhythm of the city was centered on its markets, particularly the great market of Tlatelolco. This massive commercial hub was a marvel of organization, where goods from every corner of the empire and beyond were traded. The market was a sensory experience, with sections dedicated to specific goods, from maize, beans, and produce, to luxury items like fine cotton cloth, precious feathers, gold, and jade. A system of professional judges and inspectors was in place to ensure fair prices, prevent theft, and resolve disputes. The market was not just a place of commerce, but a vital social institution, a place for news, gossip, and the display of imperial wealth and power. The daily lives of Tenochtitlan's inhabitants, particularly the Massahualtin, commoners, were dictated by their roles within the Calpulli. Farmers tended to the highly productive Chinampa plots, artisans worked in their specialized workshops, and laborers were frequently conscripted for large-scale public works projects. The city's infrastructure was a constant labor of love, with workers maintaining the dikes, sweeping the streets, and dredging the canals to prevent stagnation and ensure a clean environment. This collective responsibility, ingrained in the social fabric, was essential for the city's continued functionality and growth. Tenochtitlan's public sanitation was remarkably advanced for its time. A dedicated class of sweepers was tasked with keeping the city's streets and plazas clean, and refuse was regularly collected. The city's inhabitants also utilized a sophisticated waste management system, with human waste being collected and sold to farmers as a valuable fertilizer for the Chinampa gardens. Public baths were common, and the canals and lake were a source of clean water, a testament to the Mexica's understanding of hygiene. This emphasis on cleanliness and order was a hallmark of Aztec urban life, creating a thriving and healthy environment for its dense population. The Aztec religious system was a complex and intricate framework of beliefs that permeated every aspect of their society. At its core was a cosmology centered on cyclical creation and destruction, a concept that dictated their ritual practices and military actions. This worldview, meticulously documented in codices like the Codex Borgia, held that the universe had been created and destroyed 4 times previously, and that the current age, the fifth sun, was destined to end in a cataclysmic earthquake. This belief in an unstable cosmos, always on the brink of annihilation, created a profound sense of urgency and responsibility. The Aztecs believed that they were charged with the solemn duty of maintaining this cosmic order through a constant series of rituals and offerings. Central to this cosmic maintenance was the sun god, Huitzilopochtli. As the principal deity of the Mexica and the patron of the empire, he was considered the ultimate force that drove the current age. The Aztecs believed that the sun required a constant supply of human hearts and blood to continue its daily journey across the sky and to muster the strength to rise again each morning. This theological belief was the primary justification for their aggressive military expansion and the subsequent capture of enemies for ritual sacrifice. Warfare, therefore, was not merely a political or economic act. It was a sacred duty, a mechanism for the literal feeding of the cosmos. Aztec ritual life was a meticulously planned and highly structured affair, governed by a complex calendar system. The ritual year was divided into an 18-month cycle, with each month featuring its own set of festivals, ceremonies, and sacrifices. These rituals ranged from private family devotions to massive public ceremonies on the summit of the Templo Mayor. The priesthood, a powerful and highly educated class, was responsible for the accurate observance of these rituals, which included fasting, bloodletting, dance, and the performance of human sacrifice. The priests, acting as intermediaries between the human and divine realms, held immense authority and were critical to the functioning of the state. The practice of human sacrifice, a hallmark of Aztec religion, was not viewed as an act of cruelty but as a necessary and profound exchange. The sacrificial victims, primarily captured warriors from conquered territories, were considered sacred offerings who were elevated to a privileged status in the afterlife. The Aztecs believed that by offering the most precious gift, human life, they were repaying a cosmic debt and ensuring the continuation of the fifth sun. This ritual action was the ultimate expression of their religious beliefs, a constant, ritualized effort to stave off cosmic chaos and maintain a fragile, divinely ordained world. While many of Aztec gods were inherited from previous Mesoamerican civilizations, the Mexica of the Triple Alliance organized and prioritized them to reflect their own imperial ideology and political structure. Understanding this pantheon is crucial to comprehending the motivations behind Aztec military expansion, ritual practices, and daily life. At the apex of the Mexica pantheon was Huitzilopochtli, the god of the sun and war. As the patron deity of the Mexica, his rise to prominence mirrored the rise of their empire. He was considered the ultimate source of their power and their sacred mission. His shrine, a central feature of the Templo Mayor, symbolized his supreme importance. Huitzilopochtli was the god who required the constant sacrifice of hearts and blood to maintain the fifth sun, thereby providing the theological justification for the empire's continuous military campaigns. His influence was not merely spiritual, it was a fundamental component of the Aztec state's political and military legitimacy. Complementing Huitzilopochtli was Tlaloc, the ancient and revered god of rain, water, and fertility. Tlaloc's worship was deeply rooted in the agricultural base of the Valley of Mexico and the wider Mesoamerican world. His shrine, located alongside Huitzilopochtli's on the Templo Mayor, symbolized the crucial balance between the forces of war and agriculture. The Aztecs believed that appeasing Tlaloc was essential for a bountiful harvest, a stable food supply, and the prevention of floods and droughts. His domain directly impacted the well-being of the common people and the economic stability of the empire. Another major deity was Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent. A god with a long history in Mesoamerican mythology, Quetzalcoatl was associated with creation, knowledge, arts, and the wind. He was often seen as the patron of priests and merchants, and was revered for his role in the creation of humanity in the current age. Unlike the more demanding and violent Huitzilopochtli, Quetzalcoatl was a more benevolent figure, a deity of civilization and wisdom. His influence was pervasive in Aztec society, from the education of the nobility to the intricate artistry of their codices and stonework. Other important deities included Tezcatlipoca, the god of the night sky, discord, and sorcery, who was often seen as a rival to Quetzalcoatl, and Xiptotec, the god of agriculture, disease, and rebirth, whose rituals involved the flaying of human skin. This pantheon was not static but a dynamic system of interconnected forces. The Aztecs believed that a balance between these competing deities was necessary for the cosmos to function, and their elaborate calendar of festivals and ceremonies was designed to pay homage to each of them in their proper time. This complex theological framework was the invisible architecture that supported the visible structure of their empire. The practice of human sacrifice within the Aztec Empire was a deeply complex and ideologically central component of their religious system. It was not a random act of violence, but a highly ritualized and theologically justified practice, meticulously documented in codices and historical accounts. This ritual was directly tied to the Aztec worldview of cyclical creation and destruction, a belief that the cosmos was inherently unstable and required constant, ritualized maintenance. The primary theological justification for sacrifice was the concept of a cosmic debt. The Aztecs believed that the gods had sacrificed themselves, most notably in the creation myth of the fifth sun, to give birth to the current age. Humanity, therefore, had a solemn duty to repay this debt through the offering of the most precious gift, human life. The sun god, Huitzilopochtli in particular, was believed to require a continuous supply of human hearts and blood to sustain his daily journey across the sky and to ensure he had the strength to rise again each morning. This practice was seen as a necessary exchange, a form of cosmic reciprocity that prevented the world from plunging into eternal darkness and chaos. The sacrificial victims were primarily captured warriors from the empire's military campaigns. This practice elevated warfare to a religious mission. The Flowery Wars, a series of ritualized conflicts against rival states like Tlaxcala, were specifically designed to secure these captives. The Aztecs believed that a warrior captured in battle was a worthy and honorable offering, as their hearts and blood were considered the most potent sustenance for the gods. The captive's death was not viewed with contempt but as a sacred act that granted them a privileged status in the afterlife, a destiny shared with those who died in childbirth or in war. The ritual itself was a highly structured and public event, often conducted on the summit of the Templo Mayor, the religious center of Tenochtitlan. The priesthood, a powerful and highly educated class, oversaw the ceremonies. The victim was ritually prepared and then led to the sacrificial stone, where their heart would be removed by a priest and offered to the gods. The public nature of these rituals served a dual purpose. It fulfilled a theological imperative and simultaneously functioned as a powerful tool of imperial control. It was a visual display of the Mexica's military might and their divine authority, instilling fear in both the subjugated populations and potential enemies. The practice of human sacrifice, in its political, military, and religious dimensions, was the central pillar of the Aztec state. Aztec society, despite its militaristic and hierarchical nature, placed immense value on a structured and systematic education system. This was not a universal, uniform system but a dual one, segregated by social class and designed to prepare individuals for their specific roles within the empire. This formalized education was a critical component of the Aztec state, ensuring both the perpetuation of its administrative and religious institutions and the effective functioning of its military. The elite, or pipiltin, attended the Karmakak, a rigorous school attached to the temple complexes. This institution was a center for higher learning, where the sons of the nobility were trained for leadership roles in the military, priesthood, and bureaucracy. The curriculum was extensive and demanding, encompassing a wide range of subjects essential for governance. Students received instruction in history, astrology, religion, and philosophy, all based on the interpretation of codices. They were also trained in rhetoric, poetry, and law, preparing them for diplomatic and administrative duties. A crucial component of the Karmakak curriculum was a comprehensive military education, which included the study of strategy, tactics, and weapon use. This dual focus on intellectual and military training ensured that the ruling class was not only literate and cultured, but also capable commanders who could lead armies and administer a vast empire. The commoners, or Massaoultin, attended a different institution called the Telpocalli, or House of Youth, which was located within each of the city's Calpulli. This school provided a more practical and military-focused education. The primary purpose of the Telpocalli was to train commoners for their duties as warriors in the Aztec army. Students learned basic military discipline, the use of weapons, and the strategic goal of capturing, rather than killing, enemies. While the curriculum was centered on military training, it also included instruction in the practical skills necessary for civic life, such as farming, artisanry, and manual labor. Unlike the Karmakak, the Telpocalli did not emphasize the same level of intellectual or philosophical education. However, it was the primary mechanism for social mobility in Aztec society, as an exceptional warrior from the Telpocalli could rise through the ranks and achieve a privileged status. This dual school system demonstrated the Aztecs' understanding of the importance of specialized education. It created a highly stratified society where the nobility was prepared to rule with both intellectual and martial authority, while the commoners were prepared to serve as the economic and military backbone of the empire. This structured approach to education was a key factor in the Aztec Empire's political stability and military success, a testament to the value they placed on a highly organized and well-trained society. The Aztec civilization, often characterized by its militarism and ritual sacrifice, also possessed a sophisticated and profound tradition of poetry and philosophy. This intellectual heritage, preserved in historical codices and post-conquest writings, reveals a culture deeply concerned with fundamental questions of existence, truth, and the human condition. Unlike European philosophy, Aztec thought was not a separate discipline, but was deeply intertwined with their religious and poetic traditions, a practice known as clamatinimi, or those who know something. Aztec philosophy was primarily a form of inquiry into the nature of reality. The central philosophical concept was Teotl, a term that encompassed the divine, the sacred, and the universal force that animated all things. Philosophers sought to understand the nature of Teotl through a process of contemplation and poetic expression. They were concerned with the search for truth, believing that a fleeting and fragile truth could be found in the beauty of poetry and the transient splendor of a flower. This belief in the ephemerality of truth led to a profound focus on themes of beauty, mortality, and the fleeting nature of human existence. Poetry, or in Xochitl in Cuicat, the flower and the song, was the primary medium for philosophical expression. It was an art form held in the highest esteem, a means by which poets and thinkers could contemplate the mysteries of the universe and express their search for meaning. The poems were not simply for entertainment. They were often solemn, religious expressions that explored the fragility of life and the certainty of death. The poetry of Nezahualcoyotl, the ruler of Texcoco and a central figure in the Triple Alliance, is a notable example of this tradition. His works, which explore themes of human mortality and the search for a permanent truth, demonstrate the depth and complexity of Aztec thought. The philosophical tradition was a key component of the education of the nobility, particularly at the Carmacac. Students were trained to interpret codices, to compose poetry, and to engage in philosophical debate. This intellectual education was seen as a necessary complement to military and political training, ensuring that the ruling class was not only a capable military force, but also a literate and thoughtful one. The Mexica believed that a well-rounded leader should possess not only martial prowess, but also a deep understanding of poetry and philosophy. This sophisticated intellectual tradition served a vital social and political function. It provided a common cultural language for the Mexica elite and served as a powerful tool for legitimizing their rule. By engaging in intellectual pursuits and contemplating the deepest questions of existence, the nobility created a cultural identity that distinguished them from the commoners and solidified their position as the rightful rulers of the empire. This tradition of poetry and philosophy was a testament to the fact that the Aztec Empire was not just a military and economic machine, but a culture with a profound and enduring intellectual legacy. The artistic output of the Aztec Empire was a direct reflection of its imperial ideology, religious beliefs, and hierarchical social structure. Aztec art was not created for art's sake, but served a functional and profound purpose. From the adornment of the nobility to the documentation of their history and rituals, the incredible skill of Aztec artisans, preserved in archaeological remains and historical accounts, is a testament to a society that placed immense value on craftsmanship and visual expression. One of the most highly prized and technically demanding art forms was featherwork, or amantequeotl. This craft was the exclusive domain of a specialized guild of artisans known as the amantecas. Using a variety of exotic feathers, including those from the quetzal, hummingbird, and macaw, they created stunning mosaics, headdresses, and mantles. The feathers, often sourced from distant tributary states, were painstakingly sorted, cut, and glued onto a cotton base to create vibrant and intricate designs. These feather creations were not merely decorative, they were powerful symbols of status and imperial wealth, worn by the Tlatoani and the highest nobility during state ceremonies. The most famous examples, such as the headdress of Moctezuma II, are a testament to the technical precision and artistic vision of the Amantecas. Aztec stonework was another hallmark of their artistic and engineering prowess. Stone carving was a highly developed craft, with monumental sculptures and reliefs adorning the temples and palaces of Tenochtitlan. The Great Stone Calendar, or the Sunstone, is a prime example. This massive basalt monolith, weighing over 24 tons, is not just a calendar, but a sophisticated cosmological map, a dense tapestry of deities and celestial cycles. The intricate detail and precision of its carving demonstrate a profound understanding of stonemasonry. Other notable examples, such as the Coyolxauhqui monolith, a massive carving of the goddess of the moon, illustrate the Aztecs' ability to create powerful narrative art that served a theological purpose, vividly recounting their origin myths and sacred stories. The codices, or painted manuscripts, were an essential art form that served as the primary method of recording history, ritual, and tribute. These books, made from deer hide or tree bark paper, were painted by a highly trained class of scribes known as the Tlekuilok. The codices were not based on an alphabetic system, but on a mix of pictographs, ideograms, and phonetic signs. They documented everything from the lineage of the Tlatoani and the details of their conquests to the tribute collected from each tributary state. The vibrant colors and symbolic imagery of the codices make them both historical documents and works of art, offering invaluable insight into the Aztec worldview. This artistic output, from the delicate beauty of featherwork to the monumental power of their stonework, was a core component of the Aztec state. The ascension of Moctezuma II to the position of Tlatoani in 1502 CE marked the beginning of the final era of the Aztec Empire. He inherited an empire that was at its territorial and military zenith, a vast network of tributary states, and a capital city, Tenochtitlan, that was a marvel of urban planning and imperial power. However, his reign, which lasted until 1520 CE, was a period of increasing internal and external pressures that would ultimately set the stage for the empire's collapse. Moctezuma II was not a warrior king in the mold of his predecessors. He was a man of profound piety, a respected priest, and a ruler whose political cunning was as formidable as his military might. Moctezuma II's leadership was characterized by a consolidation of power that further stratified Aztec society. He undertook a series of political reforms that limited the power of the Calpulli leadership and elevated the status of the nobility, pipiltin. He also initiated a process to centralize the bureaucracy and administration of the empire, making the government more efficient but also more rigid. This policy was aimed at strengthening the Tlatoani's authority and ensuring that all power flowed directly from the imperial center. However, this centralization created a more distant and authoritarian state, which exacerbated the growing discontent among the commoners and the leaders of subjugated city-states. Militarily, Moctezuma II's reign saw a continuation of imperial expansion, but with a more strategic focus on border security and suppressing rebellions. He initiated a series of campaigns against the fiercely independent Tlaxcalan and Tarascan states, which were not aimed at total conquest, but at containing their influence and securing captives for ritual sacrifice. These so-called flowery wars were a critical component of his foreign policy, as they maintained the martial prestige of the Mexica and fulfilled the religious imperative of providing human offerings to the gods. However, these campaigns were also a source of constant attrition, draining the empire's resources and creating a powerful, bitter enemy in the Tlaxcalans. The political and philosophical climate of Moctezuma II's reign was marked by a growing sense of foreboding. The demands of the empire's ideology, particularly the increasing need for captives to feed the gods, created an immense strain on the state. The constant warfare and the brutal tribute system created a deep-seated resentment among the subjugated peoples, a political fracture that was becoming increasingly difficult to manage. It was in this tense and unstable environment, a period of both peak power and underlying crisis, that a series of unsettling omens began to appear, portending a new and unforeseen challenge to the Aztec cosmic order. As the Aztec Empire reached its territorial zenith, it became increasingly apparent that this vast domain was not a monolithic state but a collection of disparate peoples bound by military force and a demanding tribute system. This reality created a growing political fracture, particularly at the edges of the empire, where fiercely independent kingdoms and discontented tributary states resisted Mexica control. The reigns of Ahuitzotl and Moctezuma II were defined by a constant struggle to manage this internal and external dissent, a challenge that exposed the fundamental weaknesses of the imperial structure. The most significant and unyielding rival to the Aztec Empire was the Tlaxcalan kingdom. Located to the east of the Valley of Mexico, Tlaxcala was a confederation of 4 city-states that had successfully resisted Aztec conquest for decades. The Mexica did not aim to destroy Tlaxcala outright, but rather engaged in a series of ritualized conflicts known as the Flowery Wars. These conflicts, which were a key component of Aztec foreign policy under Moctezuma II, served a dual purpose. They provided a consistent supply of captives for ritual sacrifice and maintained the martial prestige of the Mexica warrior class. However, these wars also created a state of perpetual animosity, hardening the Tlaxcalans into a powerful and bitter enemy who would prove to be a crucial ally for the Spanish. The existence of this unconquered island in their empire's heartland was a constant political and military liability. To the west, the Tarascan kingdom, or Purepecha, represented an equally formidable and more technologically advanced rival. The Tarascans were known for their mastery of metallurgy, a skill the Aztecs lacked. Their armies were formidable, and their fortifications were designed to withstand Aztec assault. Aztec attempts at conquering the Tarascan kingdom were met with a series of decisive defeats, most notably the military disaster at Taxamaroa under the reign of Axayacatl. The Tarascan kingdom effectively marked the western limit of Aztec expansion, forcing the empire to constantly commit resources to border defense and preventing further expansion in that direction. This unconquered rival was a testament to the fact that Aztec military might was not absolute. In addition to these major rivals, the empire was plagued by constant rebellions from subjugated city-states. The oppressive tribute system, which demanded not only material goods but also human labor and warriors for sacrifice, was a continuous source of resentment. Rebellions from distant tributary states in Oaxaca and Veracruz were a frequent occurrence during the reigns of Moctezuma II and his predecessors. These revolts, while often brutally suppressed, drained the empire's resources and required a constant military presence to maintain order. The empire was not a unified political entity, but a fragile network of tributaries bound by force. This deep-seated internal fracture, combined with the presence of powerful, unconquered enemies at their borders, created an inherently unstable imperial structure that was vulnerable to a new, unforeseen threat. The final decades of the Aztec Empire were marked by a profound crisis of confidence, a growing philosophical and political unease that permeated the ruling class. As the empire reached its military and territorial zenith under Moctezuma II, the demands of their imperial ideology became increasingly difficult to reconcile with the practical realities of imperial rule. This period of intellectual and spiritual doubt, documented in post-conquest codices and accounts, created a fragile psychological state within the nobility that left the empire vulnerable to a new, unforeseen threat. The core of this crisis was rooted in the Aztec religious system and its insatiable demand for human sacrifice. As the empire expanded and a constant flow of captives was secured, the need to find new victims for the gods became a logistical and political burden. The flowery wars against the Tlaxcalans, once a source of captives and martial prestige, had devolved into a state of perpetual, resource-draining conflict. The Mexica's belief that the gods demanded these sacrifices to maintain the cosmic order was a powerful motivator, but the practical difficulties of fulfilling this theological imperative created a profound internal conflict. The ever-present need for captives meant that there could be no true peace, no end to the cycle of war and tribute. This philosophical crisis was exacerbated by a growing political instability at the heart of the empire. The centralization of power under Moctezuma II, while making the state more efficient, created a distant and authoritarian rule that was disconnected from the will of the common people. The oppressive tribute system, while enriching Tenochtitlan, created a deep-seated resentment among the subjugated peoples. This internal fracture was a constant source of anxiety for the ruling class, who were forced to commit a significant portion of their resources to suppressing rebellions and maintaining imperial order. The empire was no longer a dynamic, expanding force, but an increasingly fragile structure held together by military force and fear. Moctezuma II himself was a reflection of this crisis. As a highly pious priest and a Tlatoani who had inherited an empire at its peak, he was acutely aware of the philosophical and political demands of his position. He was a ruler who saw his role not just as a political leader, but as a cosmic custodian, responsible for the continuation of the fifth sun. This immense religious pressure, combined with the growing internal dissent and the presence of unconquered rivals on his borders, created a sense of foreboding that is reflected in the historical accounts of his reign. The Aztec leadership had always relied on their martial prowess and divine destiny to overcome their challenges, but as the empire reached its zenith, they found that their greatest challenges were now internal and philosophical. It was in this state of intellectual and political fragility that a series of unsettling omens began to appear, portending a new era of cosmic chaos. The final years leading up to the Spanish arrival in 1519 CE were marked by a series of unsettling natural phenomena and supernatural events that the Aztec priesthood and nobility interpreted as dire omens. These portents, meticulously recorded in post-conquest texts like the Florentine Codex and the accounts of indigenous historians, created a profound sense of anxiety and spiritual crisis within the empire's ruling class. This period of intellectual and psychological fragility was a direct result of the Aztec worldview, which held that such events were not random occurrences, but were messages from the gods signaling an impending shift in the cosmic order. The omens were diverse and frequently spectacular, a series of events that broke with the established patterns of the natural world. One of the most frequently cited was a flame of fire that appeared in the eastern sky for 40 nights, a light so bright that it turned night into day and was interpreted as a sign of impending war and destruction. Another portent was the sudden and inexplicable burning of the temple of Huitzilopochtli, a physical event that was seen as a direct signal that the god's favor was waning and that the heart of the empire was under threat. The temple of the god of fire, Xiuhtecutli, was also struck by a lightning bolt, an event that was widely interpreted as a sign of divine anger and a disruption of the cosmic balance. Beyond these fire-related events, other omens further deepened the sense of foreboding. The Great Lake of Texcoco, the lifeblood of Tenochtitlan, mysteriously boiled and flooded parts of the city, an event that was seen as a direct assault on the heart of the empire by the forces of chaos. A strange bird, said to be adorned with a mirror on its head, was brought before Moctezuma II. The Tlatoani, upon looking into the mirror, saw images of unfamiliar men on the distant horizon, a vision that was interpreted as a prophecy of the arrival of a new, unforeseen power. The appearance of other strange phenomena, such as a two-headed man and a group of weeping women wandering the streets, were all seen as signs that the social and cosmic order was beginning to unravel. Moctezuma II, a man of deep piety and a former priest, was particularly affected by these omens. As the spiritual and political leader of the empire, he bore the responsibility for interpreting these signs and appeasing the gods. His efforts to understand these portents and to find a way to avert the prophesied doom were a source of constant anxiety, a state that is well documented in the accounts of indigenous chroniclers. The collective fear and uncertainty generated by these omens, combined with the underlying political and social fractures of the empire, created a psychological vulnerability that left the Aztec leadership unprepared for the arrival of the Spanish. This period of omens and portents was not a cause of the empire's fall, but a powerful ideological precursor that created a climate of fear and confusion, allowing a small band of conquistadors to exploit a deep-seated spiritual crisis. The profound sense of unease created by a series of ill omens in the years leading up to 1519 CE was amplified by the first news of unfamiliar outsiders arriving on the eastern coast of the Gulf of Mexico. These initial reports, meticulously relayed to the court of Moctezuma II, were not treated as mere curiosities, but as potential fulfillments of the prophecies that had unsettled the Aztec nobility. The arrival of these strange, pale men, bearing unfamiliar technologies and animals, marked a definitive turning point in the empire's history and the beginning of a new, unforeseen era of cosmic change. The initial sightings were not of Hernán Cortés and his fleet, but of earlier Spanish expeditions, such as those led by Francisco Hernández de Córdoba in 1517 and Juan de Grijalva in 1518. Indigenous coastal communities, a part of the Aztec tribute network, were the first to encounter these explorers. Their reports, a series of detailed and often confused accounts, were swiftly sent inland to Tenochtitlan. The messages described large, floating temples, structures that were unlike any canoe or ship previously seen. They spoke of men with white skin and beards, a physical appearance that was distinct from any indigenous population. The most startling details were the descriptions of their technology, armor, and weapons made of a metal harder than any known in Mesoamerica. and strange large beasts that the men rode, which were later identified as horses. Moctezuma II's response to these reports was characterized by a combination of fear, religious anxiety, and political calculation. As a man of deep piety and a ruler who had borne the psychological burden of the recent omens, he was predisposed to interpret these sightings in a cosmic framework. The appearance of these men from the eastern sea, the direction from which the god Quetzalcoatl was prophesied to return, created a profound sense of uncertainty. This was not a military threat that could be understood through traditional Aztec military doctrine. It was a religious and ideological crisis. Moctezuma's initial actions were therefore diplomatic and symbolic, rather than military. He dispatched emissaries to the coast, bearing gifts of tribute and valuable resources, a traditional gesture of diplomacy and appeasement, but also a test of the newcomers' intentions. This series of events, from the omens to the first sightings, created a state of deep psychological fragility within the Aztec leadership. The collective fear was not of military defeat, but of a disruption of the cosmic order itself. The arrival of these outsiders, with their strange technology and unknown motivations, was seen as a sign that the gods were at play. This crisis of confidence left Moctezuma and the Aztec nobility in a state of indecision and spiritual confusion, unable to formulate a decisive military response. This was the precise psychological and political environment that Hernán Cortés would encounter upon his arrival, allowing him to exploit the existing spiritual crisis to his immense strategic advantage. In February 1519, the Spanish conquistador Hernán Cortés landed on the shores of the Yucatan Peninsula, initiating the final and most consequential chapter of the Aztec Empire's history. Cortés was not a commissioned agent of the Spanish crown, but an ambitious and opportunistic adventurer acting in defiance of his superior, the governor of Cuba, Diego Velázquez. His expedition, consisting of approximately 600 soldiers, 16 horses, and a small fleet of ships, was a venture driven by a singular purpose: to discover and conquer the wealthy civilizations rumored to exist in the interior of the mainland. Cortés's arrival was not an isolated event, but the culmination of a series of Spanish exploratory missions that had been probing the Caribbean and Gulf of Mexico for 2 decades. However, his expedition was distinguished by a decisive and aggressive strategy from the outset. After a brief but significant stop in the Tabasco region, where he defeated a local force and received a gift of 20 enslaved women, Cortés acquired his most crucial asset, a woman named Malintzin, who would become his interpreter, advisor, and mistress. Malintzin, known to the Spanish as Doña Marina, was a native Nahua speaker who also spoke Mayan, allowing Cortés to communicate with both the coastal tribes and, through a chain of interpreters, with the Mexica in Tenochtitlan. Her role was instrumental, as she provided not only linguistic translation but also crucial intelligence on the political divisions and social resentments of the region. Cortés established a base of operations on the coast, founding the settlement of Veracruz. This act was a shrewd political maneuver, as it provided him with a legal pretense for his expedition, a way to legitimize his disobedience to the governor of Cuba by establishing his authority directly under the Spanish crown. To ensure his men would not retreat, he famously scuttled his own ships, leaving them no option but to march inland and commit to the conquest. This act was a powerful display of leadership that galvanized his small force and demonstrated his unwavering resolve. The Mexica under Moctezuma II were immediately informed of Cortés's arrival and his movements. Their response was a continuation of the indecisive, religiously charged policy that had defined their reaction to the first sightings. Moctezuma dispatched emissaries to Cortés, bearing valuable gifts of gold and other tribute. This was a traditional diplomatic gesture intended to assert Mexica power and to test the newcomers' intentions. However, to the Spanish, this display of wealth served only to confirm the rumors of a vast and rich empire in the interior, fueling their greed and solidifying their resolve to march on the capital. Cortés's strategic genius lay in his ability to exploit this diplomatic and ideological uncertainty. His arrival was not a military threat to be met with force, but a complex political and religious challenge that the Aztec leadership, already in a state of crisis, was ill-prepared to confront. Following the establishment of Veracruz, Hernán Cortés embarked on a strategic march inland toward the heart of the Aztec Empire. This journey was not a simple military advance, but a complex and calculated political maneuver, as Cortés's small force was acutely aware of its numerical inferiority. His primary objective was to exploit the deep-seated political divisions and resentments that Malintzin had identified, forging alliances with indigenous groups that had been subjugated by the Aztecs. This approach, a testament to his understanding of local politics, would prove to be the single most important factor in the success of the Spanish conquest. The initial phase of the march brought Cortés and his forces into contact with the Sempoalans, a Totonac-speaking people who had been a tributary state of the Aztecs. The Sempoalans, oppressed by the brutal Aztec tribute system, saw the Spanish as a potential means of liberation. Cortés secured a critical alliance with them, using them as both guides and a source of intelligence. This first alliance was a microcosm of his larger strategy, to position the Spanish not as invaders but as liberators from Aztec tyranny, a narrative that resonated deeply with the subjugated peoples of the region. The most significant and consequential alliance was forged with the Tlaxcalans. Tlaxcala, a confederation of 4 city-states, was a fiercely independent kingdom that had successfully resisted Aztec conquest for decades. The two powers had a relationship of perpetual animosity, a state of ritualized warfare known as the Flowery Wars, which had hardened the Tlaxcalans into a formidable military force and a bitter enemy of the Aztecs. As Cortés approached their territory, he was met with a series of fierce military engagements, as the Tlaxcalans initially viewed the Spanish as another potential threat. However, after several days of intense fighting, the Tlaxcalan leadership, recognizing the Spanish' military prowess and their shared enemy, chose to form an alliance. The Tlaxcalan alliance was not a minor partnership, it was the critical turning point of the conquest. The Tlaxcalans provided Cortés with a massive indigenous army, a force of thousands of seasoned warriors who were intimately familiar with Aztec military tactics and the terrain of the Valley of Mexico. They also supplied the Spanish with a constant source of food, labor, and vital intelligence. The Tlaxcalan leaders, driven by a decades-old hatred of the Aztecs, were the most committed of all of Cortés's allies. For the Spanish, the alliance provided the manpower that they desperately needed. For the Tlaxcalans, it was a long-awaited opportunity for revenge and liberation from a tyrannical neighbor. The march inland, therefore, was not a singular Spanish effort but a coalition of forces united by a common enemy. Following the formation of the critical alliance with the Tlaxcalans, Hernán Cortés and his coalition forces continued their march toward Tenochtitlan. Their route took them through Cholula, a major city-state and a significant religious center. Cholula was a direct tributary of the Aztec Empire and was seen by the Tlaxcalans as a bitter rival. The events that transpired there were not a spontaneous act of violence, but a calculated military and political maneuver that sent a wave of terror through the Valley of Mexico. This event, the massacre at Cholula, was a decisive moment in the Spanish conquest that demonstrated the brutal efficacy of Cortés's strategy of exploiting indigenous rivalries. The Spanish and their Tlaxcalan allies were initially welcomed into Cholula, but a series of events led to a sudden and brutal assault on the city's unarmed population. Accounts from both Spanish and indigenous sources vary on the precise details, but they converge on the fact that Cortés was informed by Malintzin and his Tlaxcalan allies of a supposed plot by the Cholulans to ambush the Spanish forces. This alleged plot, which may have been a genuine plan or a fabricated pretext from the Tlaxcalans to instigate an attack on their rival, provided Cortés with the justification he needed for a preemptive strike. The massacre itself was a horrific display of violence. Cortés, under the guise of gathering the Cholulan nobility in a city plaza for a meeting, ordered his Spanish troops and their Tlaxcalan allies to attack the unarmed populace. The element of surprise was complete, and the ensuing slaughter was immense. Sources estimate that thousands of Cholulans, including priests, nobles, and civilians, were killed in a matter of hours. The city's main temple, a revered religious site, was also burned. The Tlaxcalan warriors, fueled by decades of hatred for their rivals, were particularly brutal in the massacre, demonstrating their deep-seated animosity toward the Aztec-aligned city-state. The strategic consequences of the massacre were immediate and profound. It served as a clear and terrifying message to the other city-states in the valley, a demonstration of Spanish military power and the brutal resolve of their indigenous allies. The massacre did not just eliminate a potential threat, it created a climate of fear and political uncertainty that played directly into Cortés's hands. The image of the Spanish as an unstoppable and ruthless force was solidified, and the loyalty of the Tlaxcalan alliance was cemented by a shared act of immense violence. Moctezuma II, receiving news of the massacre in Tenochtitlan, was further paralyzed by indecision. The event confirmed his fears of a new, unforeseen power and deepened his sense of spiritual foreboding. The massacre at Cholula was not a random atrocity, but a deliberate act of psychological warfare that paved the way for the Spanish to enter Tenochtitlan. Following the devastating massacre at Cholula, Hernán Cortés and his coalition of Spanish and indigenous forces continued their march into the Valley of Mexico. The event at Cholula had achieved its strategic purpose, creating a climate of fear and political instability that played directly into Cortés's hands. The news of the massacre and the brutal efficiency of the Spanish and their Tlaxcalan allies had reached the court of Moctezuma II and further paralyzed his ability to formulate a decisive military response. Instead of meeting the approaching forces on the battlefield, Moctezuma chose a diplomatic approach, a decision rooted in a combination of religious anxiety and political calculation. The pivotal meeting of the two leaders took place on November 8, 1519, on the southern causeway leading into the heart of Tenochtitlan. This event, meticulously documented in both Spanish and indigenous accounts, was a moment of immense historical and symbolic significance. Cortés, accompanied by his small band of Spanish soldiers and a massive army of Tlaxcalan warriors, was met by Moctezuma II. The Aztec ruler arrived in a procession of immense grandeur, carried on a litter adorned with precious materials and surrounded by the highest nobility of the empire. This was a deliberate display of imperial power, a show of force and opulence designed to overawe the newcomers. The encounter itself was a complex and ritualized exchange of gestures and words, facilitated by Malintzin. Moctezuma II addressed Cortés directly, and his words, as recorded by indigenous chroniclers, were a mixture of diplomatic welcome and religious foreboding. He spoke of ancient prophecies and the belief that Cortés might be the returning god-king Quetzalcoatl. While modern historians debate the veracity and specific interpretation of this return of Quetzalcoatl narrative, it is clear that Moctezuma's actions and words were shaped by a profound spiritual crisis. He did not treat Cortés as a traditional military rival, but as a figure of immense and possibly divine importance. His offer of hospitality and a place to stay within the city was a diplomatic gesture of immense consequence. Cortés's response was equally calculated. He accepted the hospitality, and his forces were quartered in the former palace of Axayacatl, a large and defensible structure adjacent to the Templo Mayor. This position gave the Spanish a crucial strategic advantage, a foothold in the heart of the empire from which they could observe the city's inner workings and plan their next moves. Moctezuma's decision to welcome the Spanish into the city was not an act of naivete but a high-risk diplomatic gamble. He believed that by welcoming Cortés and his forces, he could control them, learn their intentions, and ultimately assimilate them into the Aztec political and religious order. This gamble, however, would prove to be a fatal miscalculation, as Cortés had no intention of being a guest. The meeting on the causeway was not the end of a long journey, but the beginning of a decisive and ultimately tragic confrontation. Following their ceremonial entrance into Tenochtitlan on November 8, 1519, Hernán Cortés and his forces were quartered in the former palace of Axayacatl, a defensible structure located near the city's ceremonial center. For the next several days, The Spanish were ostensibly honored guests, but their presence in the heart of the capital created a profound and untenable political situation. The Spanish, keenly aware of their military vulnerability, were surrounded by a city of hundreds of thousands of Mexica warriors. Cortés's primary objective shifted from mere observation to securing control of the empire's leadership without inciting a massive rebellion. His solution was a brazen act of political intrigue, the capture of the Tlatoani, Moctezuma II. The pretext for Moctezuma's capture was an incident on the coast, where an Aztec garrison had attacked and killed a group of Spanish soldiers and their Chempoalan allies. Cortés, using this event as a pretense to demand justice, marched with a small, armed force to Moctezuma's palace. In a tense and dramatic confrontation, Cortés accused the Tlatoani of orchestrating the attack and demanded that he relocate to the Spanish quarters as a guest. Moctezuma, already in a state of religious and political indecision, agreed to this demand, a decision that would prove to be a fatal miscalculation. His voluntary relocation, whether an act of appeasement or a belief that he could control the situation from within, effectively placed the ruler of the Aztec Empire under house arrest. Moctezuma's imprisonment was not initially a public spectacle of humiliation. He was allowed to maintain many of the outward trappings of his authority, meeting with nobles, issuing decrees, and conducting daily life within the confines of the Spanish palace. However, his power was now entirely subject to the will of Cortés. The Spanish, through their puppet king, began to rule the empire indirectly. They demanded and received a massive ransom in gold and silver, which was then melted down and prepared for shipment back to Spain. This act of blatant economic extraction, along with the Spanish's increasingly disrespectful behavior towards Mexica religious sites, began to stoke the flames of popular discontent. The political situation reached a breaking point when Cortés received news that a rival Spanish expedition, led by Pánfilo de Narváez, had landed on the coast to arrest him for his disobedience to Governor Velázquez. Leaving a small garrison under the command of Pedro de Alvarado, Cortés was forced to march to the coast to confront this new threat. Alvarado, in a state of paranoia and fear, orchestrated the massacre of the Aztec nobility during a religious festival, an act of unprovoked violence that shattered the fragile political calm of the city. This event, born from the imprisonment of a king and the brutal actions of a Spanish subordinate, ignited a massive and full-scale rebellion against the Spanish occupation, a conflict that would change the course of the conquest. The rebellion ignited by the massacre in the Great Temple, orchestrated by Pedro de Alvarado, fundamentally changed the nature of the Spanish presence in Tenochtitlan. What began as a strategic occupation transformed into a full-scale siege as the Mexica, no longer paralyzed by indecision, rose up in a unified and violent fury against the Spanish forces and their puppet ruler, Moctezuma II. This event, which would culminate in the Noche Triste, or Sorrowful Night, was a definitive turning point in the Spanish conquest, marking a massive defeat for Cortés and a resurgence of Mexica power. Upon his return to Tenochtitlan, after defeating the rival Spanish expedition of Pánfilo de Narváez, Hernán Cortés found the city in a state of open rebellion. His small garrison under Alvarado was besieged in the palace of Axayacatl, and the Mexica forces had unified under a new, more aggressive leadership. The death of Moctezuma II, which occurred during this siege, is a matter of historical debate. Spanish accounts claim he was killed by his own people while attempting to pacify them, while indigenous sources suggest he was murdered by the Spanish. Regardless of the precise circumstances, his death removed the last element of Spanish political control and allowed the Mexica to elect a new, uncompromised Tlatoani, Cuitlahuac, who would lead the rebellion with unyielding resolve. With their puppet king dead and their position untenable, the Spanish, now reinforced by Narvaez's former troops, found themselves trapped in the heart of a hostile city. Cortés understood that a frontal assault was impossible, and that their only hope for survival was a retreat from Tenochtitlan. The Spanish chose to make their escape on the night of June 30, 1520. Their plan was to move under the cover of darkness, but the Mexica were alert to their movements. The retreat quickly devolved into a chaotic and brutal battle on the causeways, which had been stripped of their bridges by the Mexica. The Noche Triste was a military disaster for the Spanish. Burdened by their immense gold and silver loot, they struggled to navigate the gaps in the causeways. The Mexica warriors, attacking from canoes on the lake and from the rooftops of buildings, inflicted devastating casualties. Spanish soldiers, horses, and indigenous allies drowned in the lake, weighed down by their own greed. The Spanish lost a significant portion of their men, nearly all of their artillery, and most of their treasure. The survivors, a small and demoralized band, were forced to retreat to the mainland. For the Spanish, it was a moment of profound defeat. For the Mexica, it was a moment of triumph. They had successfully expelled the invaders from their city and demonstrated that they were a force to be reckoned with. However, this victory was short-lived, as Cortés, with the help of his indigenous allies, would soon begin preparations for a new and more devastating assault. The decisive Mexica victory during the Noche Triste was a temporary triumph, as Hernán Cortés and the remnants of his forces, having escaped to the mainland, immediately began to plan a new and more devastating assault. The Spanish, having suffered immense casualties, were demoralized but not defeated. Cortés's strategic genius and his ability to exploit indigenous politics once again proved to be the decisive factors. His retreat took him to the territory of his Tlaxcalan allies, who, despite the Spanish defeat, remained fiercely loyal and committed to the destruction of the Aztec Empire. The Tlaxcalans, seeing the Spanish as their best hope for liberation, provided Cortés with a safe haven, fresh troops, and a new base of operations from which to prepare for the final confrontation. The most significant strategic innovation of this new campaign was Cortés's decision to build a fleet of brigantines. These small, maneuverable ships, constructed on the mainland, were designed to be launched on Lake Texcoco. The purpose of this fleet was to neutralize the Mexica's control of the lake, cut off their supply lines, and provide a mobile platform for artillery and troops during the siege. The construction of this fleet, which required a massive logistical effort and the cooperation of thousands of Tlaxcalan laborers, was a testament to Cortés's long-term strategic vision. However, the most devastating weapon that Cortés would use against Tenochtitlan was not a military one, but a biological one. Unbeknownst to both the Spanish and the Mexica, a smallpox epidemic, brought to the mainland by an infected member of Panfilo de Narvaez's expedition, had begun to spread throughout the Valley of Mexico. The indigenous population had no natural immunity to the disease, and the epidemic, which began in the fall of 1520, swept through the densely populated city of Tenochtitlan with catastrophic results. The death toll was immense, decimating the population and killing many of the empire's leaders, including the new Tlatoani, Cuitlahuac. The epidemic created a demographic and social crisis that severely weakened the Aztecs' ability to resist the coming Spanish assault. The siege of Tenochtitlan began in May 1521. Cortés, with his newly constructed fleet of brigantines and a massive army of Spanish and indigenous allies, laid siege to the city, cutting off its food and water supply. The Mexica, under the leadership of a new Tlatoani, Cuauhtémoc, fought with immense courage and resilience. However, the combined effects of the siege, the relentless assault of Spanish artillery, and the catastrophic toll of the smallpox epidemic proved to be an overwhelming force. The city, which had once seemed unconquerable, was now a fragile and vulnerable target. The siege would last for 93 days, a brutal and protracted struggle that would end in the complete destruction of the Aztec capital. The siege of Tenochtitlan, a brutal and protracted struggle that began in May 1521, entered its final phase with the city and its population on the brink of collapse. For 93 days, the Mexica, under the leadership of the last Tlatoani, Cuauhtémoc, had fought with immense courage against overwhelming odds. The strategic superiority of the Spanish and their indigenous allies, however, proved to be an insurmountable force. The Spanish fleet of brigantines had effectively neutralized Mexica's control of the lake, cutting off all food and water supplies. This siege warfare, a deliberate strategy to starve the city into submission, created a humanitarian crisis of immense proportions, with the population facing starvation and dehydration. The most decisive factor in the fall of the city was the catastrophic toll of the smallpox epidemic. The disease, which had ravaged the population in the months leading up to the siege, continued to weaken the Mexica's ability to resist. The death toll was staggering, decimating the city's fighting force and its political leadership. The new Tlatoani, Cuauhtémoc, inherited a city that was not only under siege but was also suffering from a profound social and demographic crisis. This biological weapon, an unforeseen and uncontrollable force, was more effective than any Spanish artillery or infantry. The final assault on the city was a methodical and brutal process. Cortés and his allies advanced through the city's causeways and canals, systematically demolishing buildings and filling in waterways. This strategy served a dual purpose. It created open ground for Spanish cavalry and artillery, and it was a deliberate act of destruction aimed at demoralizing the Mexica. The fighting was fierce and often took place in the rubble of destroyed temples and palaces. The Mexica, fighting with immense resilience, was slowly pushed back into the final quadrant of the city. The end of the Aztec Empire came on August 13, 1521. With the last pocket of resistance cornered and defeated, the Spanish captured Cuauhtémoc as he attempted to escape the city by canoe. His capture was a symbolic and decisive end to the Aztec resistance, effectively decapitating the political and military leadership of the empire. The fall of the city was not a single, glorious moment of victory, but a brutal and methodical destruction that left the once magnificent capital in ruins. The aftermath of the city's fall was a period of immense tragedy. The victorious Spanish and their indigenous allies, particularly the Tlaxcalans, were given 3 days to sack the city. The looting was immense, with the conquerors seizing vast amounts of gold and other valuables. The city, once the heart of a great empire, was left in a state of complete devastation. The fall of Tenochtitlan marked the end of the Aztec Empire and the beginning of a new era of Spanish colonial rule. The capture of Cuauhtémoc on August 13, 1521, marked the definitive end of the Aztec Empire's political and military resistance. The immediate aftermath of the city's fall was a period of immense devastation and a profound political and social transition. Tenochtitlan, once the magnificent capital of a vast empire, was left in a state of complete ruin. The prolonged siege and the systematic destruction of its infrastructure, combined with the immense death toll from the smallpox epidemic, had transformed the thriving metropolis into a desolate and broken landscape. The first act of the victorious Spanish and their indigenous allies was the thorough looting of the city. The Spanish, driven by the desire for gold and silver, scoured the rubble for treasure, a process that was brutal and often yielded less than they had hoped for, as much of the wealth had been hidden or lost in the lake during the siege. The Tlaxcalans and other indigenous allies, having fought with unyielding ferocity, were also given a 3-day period to sack the city, an act of revenge against their long-standing rivals. This period of widespread looting and destruction was a physical manifestation of the empire's collapse, erasing the symbols of its power and wealth. The fall of Tenochtitlan was not an end but a beginning. Hernán Cortés immediately began the process of establishing a new political order. The rubble of the Aztec capital was not abandoned, but was systematically dismantled and used as the foundation for a new city. On the ruins of Tenochtitlan, the Spanish began to build Mexico City, the capital of the new colonial viceroyalty of New Spain. This act was a deliberate and powerful political statement. The complete erasure of the old imperial center and its replacement with a new one. The Templo Mayor, the symbolic heart of the Aztec universe, was destroyed, and a new cathedral was built on its foundations, a physical manifestation of the new religious and political order. The Mexica population that survived the siege and the epidemic faced a complete social and political collapse. The Tlatoani, Cuauhtémoc, was captured and later executed, a definitive act that decapitated the Aztec political structure. The nobility was either killed or subsumed into the new colonial administration, and the rigid social hierarchy of the empire was dismantled. The surviving commoners were incorporated into the new colonial labor system, their land and resources now subject to Spanish control. This transition was a brutal and immediate process of cultural annihilation, as the Aztec religious and political institutions were systematically replaced by those of the Spanish. The fall of Tenochtitlan was thus not just a military defeat, but the end of a civilization and the dawn of a new colonial era that would fundamentally reshape the political, social, and cultural landscape of Mesoamerica. The fall of Tenochtitlan and the subsequent establishment of New Spain marked the end of the Aztec Empire as a political entity, but it did not signify the complete erasure of Aztec civilization. The cultural, social, and linguistic influences of the Mexica and their imperial predecessors have endured, profoundly shaping the identity of modern Mexico. The legacy of the Aztec civilization is a complex and multifaceted one, a testament to the resilience of a culture that survived conquest and continues to resonate in the present day. One of the most visible and lasting legacies of the Aztec Empire is its language, Nahuatl. Despite the Spanish imposition of Castilian as the official language, Nahuatl continued to be spoken by a significant portion of the population. Today, it remains one of the most widely spoken indigenous languages in Mexico. Its influence is also evident in the modern Spanish language, with numerous words of Nahuatl origin such as chocolate, tomato, and chili becoming commonplace in the global lexicon. This linguistic survival is a powerful example of cultural persistence in the face of colonial rule. The political and social structures of the Aztec Empire, while dismantled, provided a foundation for the new colonial order. The Spanish, in their quest to establish control, often repurposed the existing systems of governance. The Altepetl were often converted into Spanish administrative units, and the Mexica nobility, the Pipiltin, were sometimes incorporated into the new colonial bureaucracy. The tribute system was replaced by the Spanish system of taxation, but its fundamental structure, which was based on the extraction of resources and labor from indigenous communities, remained a familiar and brutal reality for the native population. This adaptation of existing indigenous systems of control was a pragmatic strategy that allowed for the efficient administration of the new colonial viceroyalty. The religious and symbolic legacy of the Aztecs is a cornerstone of modern Mexican identity. The image of the eagle devouring a snake on a cactus, the central prophecy that guided the Mexica, was adopted as a powerful symbol of Mexican nationalism. It is featured prominently on the country's flag and serves as a direct link to a pre-Hispanic past. This symbolic appropriation of Aztec heritage was a deliberate act of cultural identity formation, a way for the new nation to claim a rich indigenous history. The syncretism of indigenous beliefs with Catholicism also resulted in a unique religious culture. Many traditional Aztec rituals and beliefs were incorporated into Catholic holidays and practices, creating a distinct and enduring form of folk Catholicism that is practiced to this day. The cultural and artistic traditions of the Aztec Empire have also had a lasting impact. The rich tradition of stonework, featherwork, and pottery, while initially suppressed, has experienced a modern resurgence. Contemporary artists draw inspiration from these ancient forms, ensuring that the aesthetic heritage of the Aztecs continues to be a vibrant part of Mexican art. The legacy of the Aztec Empire, in its language, symbols, social structures, and art, is not a memory of a lost civilization, but a living, breathing component of the cultural fabric of modern Mexico.